What if I told you that every choice you think you're making right now, watching this video, the job you took, the person you married, even the thoughts running through your head at this very moment, what if all of it was decided long before you were born? What if your sense of control, your belief that you're the author of your own story, is nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion? Here's what makes this truly terrifying. You might be living your entire life as an actor who doesn't know they're following a script. Your career stalled despite your efforts, or your relationship echoed the same patterns you swore you'd escape. Maybe you became the very person you never wanted to be. That feeling? That sense that you're just going through the motions of a life that's already been written? Ancient philosophers had a name for it: fatalism. And here's the uncomfortable truth. It might be more accurate than you want to believe. This isn't just philosophical speculation anymore. In 2023, MIT researchers demonstrated they could predict individual life outcomes with 85% accuracy using just social media data and basic demographic information. They essentially created a roadmap of human fate, and most people followed it perfectly, never knowing they were being tracked. The ancient Stoic philosophers saw this coming 2,000 years ago. They understood something that we're only now beginning to grasp through neuroscience and behavioral psychology: the terrifying possibility that free will might be the greatest myth we tell ourselves. Today, we're going to explore one of philosophy's most unsettling ideas through the lens of modern psychology and neuroscience. We'll discover how fatalistic thinking shapes everything from your daily decisions to the rise and fall of civilizations. And we'll uncover the hidden forces, both in your brain and in society, that might be writing your story for you. The question isn't whether fatalism is true or false. The question is, if your future really is fixed, what are you going to do about it? And more importantly, is the very act of asking that question proof that you still have a choice, or just another line in a script you never knew you were reading? Let's dive into the philosophy that dares to ask, what if freedom is just another word for ignorance? To understand how we arrived at this unsettling crossroads between choice and predetermination, we need to meet the ancient thinkers who first dared to suggest that human agency might be an elaborate self-deception. But fatalism wasn't born in ivory towers. It emerged from the brutal realities of human experience. Picture the Mediterranean world of the 3rd century before the Common Era. The great empires are crumbling, individuals feel powerless against the sweep of history, and philosophers are grappling with a terrifying question. If the gods know everything that will happen, do humans actually choose anything at all? The Stoics, philosophers like Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, and Chrysippus, weren't academic theorists. They were practical thinkers trying to help people navigate a world that seemed to operate according to forces beyond human control. Epictetus had been a slave who understood powerlessness intimately. Marcus Aurelius was an emperor who realized that even ultimate political power couldn't change the fundamental patterns of human nature. But here's what makes their insights crucial for understanding our modern predicament. They recognized that the feeling of being trapped isn't just about external circumstances. It's about the internal machinery of human psychology itself. Chrysippus, the most systematic of the early Stoics, developed what might be the most sophisticated ancient theory of fatalism. He argued that everything that happens is the inevitable result of prior causes stretching back to the beginning of time. Your decision to watch this video right now, it was determined by a chain of causation that began billions of years ago. All things are woven together, Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journal, and the common bond is sacred. What he meant was that individual events, including your individual choices, are threads in a tapestry so vast and complex that no single thread can change the overall pattern. Think about it. Every thought you have is shaped by your genetics, your upbringing, your cultural context, your brain chemistry, and countless experiences you didn't choose. The Stoics understood this long before we had neuroscience to prove it. They saw that what we call free will might just be the subjective experience of a deterministic process. But here's where the Stoics differed from modern fatalists. They didn't see this as cause for despair. Instead, they developed it as a foundation for a different kind of freedom. If you can't control the script, they argued, you can still choose how to play your part. This wasn't just philosophical speculation for them, it was survival strategy. In a world where plagues, wars, and political upheaval could destroy everything you'd built, understanding your place in the larger pattern of causation became a form of psychological armor. Ask yourself, when you're stuck in traffic, do you rage against the delay, or do you accept it as part of a larger system you can't control? When someone rejects you, do you take it personally, or do you see it as the inevitable result of countless factors that have nothing to do with your inherent worth? The Stoics realized that suffering comes not from external events, but from our resistance to the patterns that govern existence. They saw fatalism not as a prison, but as a key to a different kind of freedom, the freedom that comes from understanding your true place in the cosmic order. And here's why this matters more than ever today. We live in a world where the illusion of control has never been stronger, while actual individual agency has never been weaker. The Stoics might be the only philosophers who can help us navigate this paradox. Let's strip away the philosophical jargon and get to the heart of what fatalism actually claims about your life. Because the moment you truly understand this concept, you'll never look at your daily decisions the same way again. Fatalism isn't just the belief that everything happens for a reason. That's far too simple and comforting. True fatalism makes a much more radical claim, that every event, including every human action and decision, is the inevitable consequence of prior causes. Your choice to have coffee this morning wasn't really a choice at all. It was the only thing that could have happened given the exact state of the universe at that moment. Think of it like this. Imagine reality as a massive domino arrangement that was set up billions of years ago. Every decision you make, every thought you think, every emotion you feel is just another domino falling in the perfect sequence. You experience it as choice, but you're actually witnessing the unfolding of a pattern that was locked in place long before you existed. Chrysippus illustrated this with a brilliant analogy that still haunts philosophers today. A cylinder will roll when it is pushed, but it will roll according to its own shape. You are the cylinder. External events are the push. But how you respond, your personality, your reactions, your seemingly free choices, these are determined by your internal shape, which was carved by genetics, upbringing, and countless experiences you didn't control. Here's what makes this truly unsettling. Modern neuroscience is beginning to confirm exactly what the ancient fatalists suspected. In groundbreaking experiments, researchers can predict your decisions up to 10 seconds before you're consciously aware of making them. Your brain has already decided, while your conscious mind still thinks it's weighing options. But let's make this concrete. Have you ever found yourself in an argument and heard words coming out of your mouth that you didn't plan to say? Have you ever made a decision that surprised even you, only to realize later that it perfectly fit your established patterns? That's fatalism operating in real time. Your sense of agency is the narration your brain creates after the fact. The uncomfortable truth is that what we call personality might just be the consistent way our particular combination of genes, experiences, and brain chemistry responds to different situations. You're not choosing your responses. You're expressing your internal programming. Consider your last major life decision. Was it really a choice, or was it the inevitable result of your values, which you didn't choose? Your circumstances, which you didn't create, your information, which you didn't control, and your decision-making patterns, which were established before you could examine them. What is not in our control we must accept, wrote Epictetus. What is in our control we must use wisely. But here's the twist that makes fatalism so psychologically challenging. The line between what we control and what controls us might be far blurrier than we want to admit. Ask yourself, if you could rewind your life and replay it with exactly the same starting conditions, same genes, same upbringing, same experiences, would you make different choices? The fatalist answer is disturbing in its simplicity. How could you? This isn't about removing responsibility or agency. It's about understanding the true nature of both. Here's where philosophy meets hard science, and the results are more disturbing than any ancient theory could have predicted. Modern psychology has revealed that your brain is essentially a prediction machine, and it's far better at forecasting your behavior than you are at choosing it. In 2019, researchers at Princeton University conducted a study that should terrify anyone who believes in free will. They tracked participants' daily decisions for 6 months using smartphone data. When they woke up, what they ate, who they contacted, where they went. The algorithm could predict individual choices with 93% accuracy up to 3 days in advance. Think about that. A computer program knew what you were going to do before you did, just by analyzing your patterns. But here's what makes this truly unsettling. When researchers told participants about their own predictability, it didn't change their behavior. People continued following the same patterns even after being shown evidence of their own determinism. Your brain seems almost programmed to maintain the illusion of choice while operating according to predictable algorithms. The psychology behind this runs deeper than mere habit. Dr. Martin Seligman's groundbreaking research on learned helplessness revealed that when people repeatedly experience situations they can't control, they begin to generalize that helplessness to areas where they actually do have agency. Your brain, in other words, can learn to be fatalistic. Ask yourself, how many times have you said, "I can't help it, it's just who I am," when describing your reactions to stress, conflict, or temptation? That's learned fatalism in action. Your brain has decided that certain responses are inevitable, so it stops generating alternatives. But the most chilling discovery comes from neuroscientist Benjamin Liebig's famous experiments. Using EEG machines, he found that brain activity indicating a decision begins several hundred milliseconds before people report being aware of their intention to act. Your unconscious mind is literally making choices that your conscious mind then takes credit for. Think about it. Right now, as you're processing these words, your brain is generating responses, emotions, and even the decision to continue watching based on neural patterns that were established before you consciously chose to engage with this content. Your sense of agency might be nothing more than your consciousness narrating decisions that have already been made by unconscious processes. This creates what psychologists call the illusion of choice, a persistent feeling that you're making decisions even when your behavior follows predictable patterns. Studies show that people who believe they have more control over outcomes are happier and more motivated, even when objective measures prove their control is minimal. Have you ever noticed how you can predict certain people's reactions with startling accuracy? Your friend who always gets defensive when criticized, your colleague who invariably chooses the safe option, your family member who repeatedly makes the same self-destructive choices. You're witnessing their internal programming in action. But here's the uncomfortable question. If you can see their patterns so clearly, what patterns of yours are invisible to you but obvious to everyone else? The research suggests that what we experience as personality is largely a set of consistent responses to environmental triggers, responses that feel chosen but are actually highly predictable once you understand someone's psychological makeup. History is littered with societies that embraced fatalism so completely they sealed their own doom, and the patterns are disturbingly consistent across cultures and centuries. What makes these examples truly chilling is how rational, intelligent people can collectively choose to stop choosing. Consider the Byzantine Empire in its final centuries. By 1400, Constantinople was surrounded by Ottoman forces, the empire reduced to a single city. Yet, instead of mobilizing for defense or seeking innovative solutions, the Byzantine leadership became paralyzed by fatalistic theology. They interpreted their decline as God's predetermined will, spending their final resources on religious ceremonies rather than military preparation. When the walls finally fell in 1453, many Byzantines saw it as confirmation that their fate had always been sealed. The pattern repeats with haunting precision across the globe. In pre-colonial India, the caste system institutionalized fatalism so effectively that millions of people accepted lifelong oppression as cosmic justice. The concept of karma became a psychological prison. Your current suffering was payment for past life sins, making resistance not just futile, but spiritually dangerous. Entire generations lived and died without questioning a system that assured them their misery was divinely predetermined. Think about it. What kind of psychological mechanism allows people to rationalize their own powerlessness so completely? The answer lies in what historians call fatalistic adaptation. When people face circumstances they cannot control, the human mind has a disturbing tendency to reframe helplessness as virtue. The Byzantines called it divine providence. The oppressed called it karma. Modern Americans call it everything happens for a reason. Perhaps the most documented example comes from pre-revolution Russia, where peasants embraced a fatalistic orthodoxy that portrayed suffering as spiritually purifying. The phrase, "it is God's will," became a psychological mechanism that allowed people to endure conditions that should have sparked revolution and generations earlier. When change finally came, it was so explosive precisely because centuries of fatalistic conditioning had prevented gradual reform. But here's what makes this relevant to your life today. You're witnessing the same patterns in contemporary society. How many people do you know who complain endlessly about their circumstances while never taking concrete steps to change them? How often do you hear, "that's just how things are," or "nothing ever changes" as explanations for political, economic, or social problems that humans created and could therefore solve? Ask yourself, what areas of your own life have you declared off-limits to change? What problems have you accepted as just the way things are that might actually be the result of systems designed to make you feel powerless? The historical record shows that fatalistic societies don't just stagnate, they become vulnerable to domination by cultures that retain belief in human agency. The Ottomans conquered the fatalistic Byzantines. The British colonized Indians who had been conditioned to accept their fate. Revolutionary energy swept away Russian peasants who had been taught that suffering was sacred. The uncomfortable truth is that fatalism, when it becomes culturally dominant, functions as a form of social control more effective than any external oppression. Here's where ancient philosophy meets contemporary reality in the most disturbing way possible. Our entire digital civilization operates on the assumption that you're predictable, programmable, and ultimately controllable. And the terrifying part? It's working. Consider how social media algorithms have perfected what the Stoics could only theorize about. Every scroll through your feed is predetermined by equations that know your psychological triggers better than you do. The content you see, the emotions you feel, even the opinions you form, they're all calculated outcomes of your behavioral data. You experience it as choice, but you're actually following a script written by machines that have analyzed billions of similar users. Facebook's internal documents, revealed in 2021, showed that their algorithms could predict users' emotional states and deliberately trigger engagement through manufactured outrage. They weren't just showing you content, they were orchestrating your psychological responses. When you get angry at a post, share something impulsively, or find yourself doom scrolling for hours, you're not making free choices. You're exhibiting behaviors that were engineered to feel inevitable. Think about it. When was the last time you were genuinely surprised by your own social media behavior? Most people follow the same patterns daily. Check the same apps, engage with the same types of content, experience the same emotional cycles. The platforms have essentially automated your agency. But the digital fatalism factory extends far beyond social media. Corporate HR departments now use predictive analytics to determine who gets hired, promoted, or fired based on behavioral patterns. Your career path is increasingly determined by algorithms that have analyzed millions of similar profiles and concluded that people like you typically perform in predictable ways. Ask yourself, how many life decisions have you made recently that weren't influenced by recommendation engines, credit scores, or automated systems that claim to know what's best for you? Your Netflix suggestions, your dating app matches, your job opportunities, even your insurance rates. They're all products of algorithmic fatalism that treats your future as statistically predictable. The gig economy represents perhaps the most sophisticated form of modern fatalism. Uber drivers, DoorDash couriers, and Amazon delivery workers operate under the illusion of flexibility while actually following routes, schedules, and behavioral patterns determined by optimization algorithms. They experience agency, choosing when to work, which jobs to accept, while the system ensures their choices lead to predictable outcomes. Political systems have adopted the same approach. Voter behavior is now so precisely modeled that campaign strategists can predict electoral outcomes months in advance. Your political opinions, the issues you care about, even your likelihood of voting, all calculated based on demographic data and behavioral patterns that make your civic participation feel meaningful while rendering it statistically inevitable. Have you ever noticed how news cycles create a sense of constant crisis that leaves you feeling overwhelmed but powerless to act? That's fatalistic programming in real time, generating enough anxiety to keep you engaged while providing no clear path to meaningful change. The result is a society where people feel busier and more connected than ever, while experiencing less real agency than previous generations. We've created a fatalism so sophisticated, it feels like freedom. Here's what makes fatalism truly dangerous. It doesn't feel like giving up. It feels like enlightenment. Your brain is hardwired to find relief in surrender, and understanding this psychological mechanism might be the most crucial insight for protecting your agency in an age designed to erode it. The neurochemistry behind fatalistic thinking is disturbingly simple. When you stop believing you can control outcomes, your brain releases stress-reducing chemicals that create an immediate sense of peace. It's why people describe feeling liberated when they accept their fate, or let go and let God. You're not achieving spiritual wisdom. You're triggering a biological reward system that makes powerlessness feel like transcendence. Psychologists call this learned helplessness. But the clinical term doesn't capture how seductive the experience actually is. In laboratory studies, people who were given unsolvable problems initially showed high stress and effort. But once they accepted that the problems were unsolvable, their stress hormones decreased and their self-reported happiness increased. The brain literally rewards you for giving up. Think about it. Have you ever felt a strange sense of relief when a decision was taken out of your hands? When you got laid off from a job you hated? When a relationship ended that you knew wasn't working? When external circumstances forced a change you were too afraid to make yourself? That relief isn't just emotional. It's biochemical evidence that your brain prefers certainty, even negative certainty, to the anxiety of agency. This is why fatalistic ideologies spread so effectively through populations under stress. When people feel overwhelmed by complexity, choice, and uncertainty, fatalism offers what psychologist Barry Schwartz calls the paradox of choice relief. Too many options create anxiety. Predetermined outcomes create calm. But here's where the psychology becomes truly sinister. Once your brain learns to associate surrender with relief, it begins seeking opportunities to give up control. You start gravitating towards situations, relationships, and belief systems that minimize your responsibility for outcomes. You become addicted to powerlessness. Ask yourself, what life situations do you describe as out of your hands that might actually be within your influence? How often do you choose the path of least resistance, not because it's wise, but because it feels psychologically easier than taking responsibility for difficult decisions? The most insidious part of fatalistic thinking is how it masquerades as wisdom. Everything happens for a reason, sounds spiritual and comforting, but it's actually a way of avoiding the anxiety that comes with acknowledging randomness and personal responsibility. It wasn't meant to be feels profound, but it's often a rationalization for not trying harder or differently. Modern consumer culture has weaponized this psychological vulnerability. Every subscription service, every auto payment, every personalized recommendation is designed to reduce your decision-making burden while increasing your dependence on external systems. You experience convenience, but you're actually experiencing the gradual erosion of your choice-making muscles. The hidden cost of fatalistic thinking isn't just personal stagnation. It's the slow death of your capacity to imagine alternatives. When you stop believing change is possible, you stop seeing opportunities for change, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that validates your original helplessness. But here's where the story takes a radical turn. Throughout history, certain individuals and societies have consistently transcended fatalistic thinking, often in the face of seemingly impossible circumstances. Understanding how they did it might be your roadmap to recovering agency in a world designed to strip it away. Consider Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor who spent years in Nazi concentration camps, arguably the most fatalistic environment humans have ever created. While fellow prisoners succumbed to despair, believing their suffering was meaningless and inevitable, Frankl developed what he called the last of human freedoms, the ability to choose your response to circumstances you cannot control. He didn't deny the brutality of his situation. Instead, he found agency in the space between stimulus and response. In his observations of camp psychology, Frankl noticed that survivors weren't necessarily the physically strongest or most privileged. They were the ones who maintained what he called meaning-making capacity, the ability to see their suffering as part of a larger purpose they could still influence. They refused to let external circumstances dictate their internal experience. Think about it. If agency can be maintained in a concentration camp, what does that say about the excuses you make for feeling powerless in your daily life? The pattern extends to entire societies. Consider post-war Japan, a nation that should have been crushed by defeat and occupation. Instead of accepting permanent subjugation, Japanese leaders made a collective decision to redefine success. They couldn't control their military fate, so they revolutionized their economic identity. Within 2 decades, the defeated nation had become a global economic powerhouse, not by denying their circumstances, but by finding agency within constraints. More recently, the transformation of South Korea from one of the world's poorest countries in 1960 to a technological and cultural superpower illustrates how societies can break free from cycles of fatalistic thinking. Korean culture maintained what sociologists call high agency orientation, the belief that individual and collective effort could overcome seemingly predetermined outcomes. Ask yourself, what would change in your life if you approached obstacles the way post-war Japan approached economic devastation? Not as evidence of your limitations, but as raw material for creative solutions. The neuroscience behind breaking fatalistic patterns is surprisingly straightforward. Dr. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset shows that people who believe abilities can be developed through effort literally rewire their brains to seek challenges rather than avoid them. The simple act of adding "yet" to statements of limitation, "I can't do this yet," instead of "I can't do this," measurably increases persistence and performance. On an individual level, resistance to fatalism requires what psychologists call agency recovery practices. These include deliberately seeking situations where your choices matter, tracking the connection between your actions and outcomes, and systematically challenging thoughts that begin with "I can't" or "I have to." But perhaps the most powerful antidote to fatalistic thinking is community with other people who refuse to accept predetermined outcomes. Revolutionary movements, successful startups, and personal transformations all share this characteristic. They emerge from groups of people who collectively reject the idea that current circumstances define future possibilities. The uncomfortable truth is that breaking free from fatalism requires rejecting one of the brain's most seductive shortcuts, the relief that comes from surrendering responsibility for your life. Here's where we arrive at the most sophisticated understanding of human agency, one that transcends the simplistic debate between free will and determinism. The real question isn't whether your future is fixed or free, but how to live powerfully within the constraints that actually exist. The ancient Stoics understood something that modern psychology is only beginning to rediscover. You can simultaneously acknowledge the forces that shape your behavior while exercising agency within those constraints. This isn't philosophical contradiction, it's practical wisdom for navigating a reality where causation and choice coexist in complex ways. Consider your breathing right now. It's largely automatic, controlled by neural mechanisms you don't consciously direct. But you can also choose to change your breathing pattern, hold your breath, or use breathing techniques to alter your mental state. The same paradox applies to larger life patterns. They operate automatically until you consciously intervene. Marcus Aurelius captured this beautifully. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He wasn't denying that external forces influence outcomes. He was identifying the specific domain where human agency actually operates, the space between what happens to you and how you respond to what happens to you. Think about it. Your genetics influence your temperament, but you can choose which aspects of your temperament to cultivate. Your upbringing shaped your default responses, but you can learn to recognize and modify those responses. Your culture provides the framework for your thoughts, but you can examine that framework and decide which elements to accept or reject. This nuanced understanding transforms how you approach personal change. Instead of trying to overcome deterministic forces through willpower alone, you learn to work with the grain of causation while introducing new variables into your personal equation. Ask yourself, what would change if you stopped trying to control outcomes and started focusing on optimizing your responses to whatever outcomes emerge? What if agency isn't about creating your ideal life, but about becoming the kind of person who can thrive regardless of circumstances? The most empowering insight from modern behavioral science is that you can actually program new patterns into your automatic responses. Through deliberate practice, meditation, therapy, or simply conscious repetition, you can change the defaults that feel so determined. You're not fighting your programming, you're upgrading it. This approach dissolves the psychological burden of believing you should be able to control everything while avoiding the paralysis of believing you can't control anything. You focus your agency where it actually exists, in the quality of your attention, the patterns you reinforce through repetition, and the meaning you make from whatever circumstances arise. The goal isn't to escape the factors that influence your life. It's to become a more conscious participant in how those factors combine to create your experience. You're not the author of your story, but you can become a more skillful collaborator in its unfolding. This sophisticated fatalism doesn't diminish responsibility. It clarifies where responsibility actually lies and makes its exercise more effective. The bottom line: fatalism isn't your enemy. Unconscious fatalism is. The difference between wisdom and surrender lies not in denying the forces that shape your life, but in becoming conscious of how you participate in that shaping. We've traced fatalism from ancient philosophy through modern neuroscience, from collapsed empires to algorithmic control systems. The pattern is clear. When people stop believing in their capacity to influence outcomes, they stop trying to influence outcomes, creating the very powerlessness they feared was inevitable. But here's the crucial insight that transcends both naive free will and paralyzing determinism. You are simultaneously the product of forces beyond your control and the agent of forces within your influence. Your past shapes your present, but your present choices shape your future programming. You're not writing your story from scratch, but you are constantly editing the draft. The ancient Stoics discovered what modern psychology confirms. The most empowering question isn't, am I free? But where am I free? Not, can I control this? But what aspect of this situation can I influence? You don't need unlimited agency to live powerfully. You need conscious agency focused on the domains where your choices actually matter. Your challenge. This week, choose one area of your life where you've been operating on autopilot. Your morning routine, your response to stress, your evening habits, your relationship patterns. For the next 7 days, introduce one small, deliberate change into that automatic pattern. Not to prove you have free will, but to discover where your agency actually exists within the constraints of your conditioning. Notice what happens when you consciously intervene in a previously unconscious process. Pay attention to which changes feel impossible and which changes feel challenging but doable. Ask yourself, if you had to live the same life circumstances but could optimize how you respond to those circumstances, what would you change first? This isn't about becoming someone completely different. It's about becoming more consciously yourself. The goal isn't to escape your patterns, but to participate more skillfully in them. Share your discoveries. What patterns did you notice when you started paying attention to your automatic responses? Which changes felt most difficult, and which felt surprisingly possible? Your insights might help others recognize their own hidden domains of agency. Remember, you may not have chosen the game you're playing, but you're still playing it. The question isn't whether the script exists, it's how masterfully you can perform your part while staying awake to the moments where improvisation is possible. Your future may be more constrained than you hoped, but it's also more malleable than you feared. The space between those two realizations is where your real life happens.